Ciao everyone, this is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. This week's video is going to be a little different from usual. So before we go any further, let me just say that if you like videos of cultural, political, and religious commentary from a different point of view, then don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell for notifications. This past weekend, the annual Politicon was held at the Los Angeles Downtown Convention Center. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Politicon is described as the Comic-Con for political enthusiasts and political junkies. It was started only 4 years ago with the express goal of bringing Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, libertarians, basically everybody from every side of the political aisle under one roof where ideas and policies could be discussed and argued, and so that each side could trade some good old-fashioned barbs with each other, all in good fun, of course. I was actually able to attend. I flew out for the very short weekend to Los Angeles, and I had a blast. Guys, I was not only able to hear some great speakers like Ben Shapiro, but I was actually also able to meet and speak to some great people like Kaya Jones and Lauren Chen, whom we all know here on YouTube as Roaming Millennial. And I was actually able to expand my mind. There's a quote from the British author G.K. Chesterton, which I'm very fond of, like I'm fond of most of his quotes, which says that the whole point of having an open mind like an open mouth is to close it down on something solid. The meaning being that we have an open mind not just for the sake of keeping our minds open so that anything can go in and out, but so that we can close it down on something practical, on something true, on something useful. And the highlight of Politicon in that sense was the panel I attended on the American Opioid Crisis, a panel which had Chris Christie, Kentucky Secretary of State Allison Grimes, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and Johan Hari on it. And the panel was discussing not only the opioid crisis, which is a real thing by the way, but also how it could be solved. Now, up until this weekend, I have been what you might call a hardliner on the issue of drugs. And I'm not talking about medications, but the so-called recreational drugs like marijuana, heroin, and cocaine. And the argument that even some of these drugs, like marijuana, should be legalized because of freedom or so that the black market could go under never really made sense to me. In the first place, because being free to get addicted to something which takes away your freedom never made sense. And secondly, the idea that the black market would bow out of the game just because we legalized some drugs also never really made sense to me, especially when it's possible that the drug cartels were responsible for some of the fires out west, like in California, where recreational marijuana and the like were being grown. But Dr. Pinker, especially on the panel, made a great point. He said that the end goal of any drug policy should be abstinence, because abstinence is better than addiction, obviously. But in order to get to that goal, Dr. Pinker said that any and all measures should be laid out on the table and actually seriously considered. So if that meant that abstinence could be achieved through legalizing marijuana, that option should actually seriously be considered. Or if a step towards abstinence could be made through creating government centers where drug addicts could get high on the drug of their choice under supervision, then that too should be put on the table and seriously discussed. He also made the point that since studies have shown that 90% of drug addicts have admitted to having childhood abuse and childhood trauma, that maybe that should be looked into as well. Just a thought.
In my world, if you have bad enough addiction that you need to see me, there's also a 100% probability that you had childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is what causes people to exit the frame of connection and be unwilling to go back. So the means by which a normal human develops the capacity for emotional regulation. And the conundrum for the opiate addict is they're unregulated. How you solve that problem is by re-entering connection with other humans. Brains heal other brains. If you have that connection sustained over time, it's kind of a complicated issue in what that connection needs to do, but there are mutual aid societies out there that are constructed to enhance that connection and motivate that connection and develop it over years. That connection is what heals the regulation and helps people manage this thing that has been triggered we call addiction. So
the great thing about this panel was that it actually gave me new information and it gave me new POVs of looking at the issue. Again, up until this time, I was really a hardliner on the issue of drugs because I thought, no, people should not take drugs, and legalizing drugs will only get more people taking drugs and potentially more people getting addicted to them. But again, Dr. Pinker changed the perspective. He said the end goal should be abstinence. How do we move that forward? And if it means legalizing some drugs legitimately to get towards abstinence, then maybe that's not quite a bad idea. It was, even if I'm wrong, that was a very refreshing experience. And in my mind, that's what Politicon should be all about. Unfortunately, like I said, that panel in that regard was actually the high watermark of the weekend, because the whole point of the Politicon was to have fun and also to argue. And there were a couple of times when neither one seemed to be happening. Example number one, the very first panel I attended on Saturday was entitled Fake News versus the World, and it had Sally Kahn, Roaming, and David Brock of Media Matters, just to drop a few names. Now, the whole point of this panel was to define fake news, decide which side was responsible for it, or if both sides were, and then to solve the problem, as Sally Kahn, maybe in hindsight, facetiously said at the beginning. But it very quickly dissolved.
Can I ask a quick question here? And I want to come back to the term, which I find very aggravating, but why is that then fake? As opposed to, you don't like the conclusion, you think it was
I like that
fake.
Very much.
But you're just saying it was fake.
Yeah, well, that story, and I
What
think
is
it's
it?
important to understand that a lot of times journalists aren't the ones who are actually writing the headlines and marketing on social media, right? So that headline, I'm not sure if you came up with that yourself, but if you look at that headline, you know, Elizabeth Warren has Native American ancestry.
But that's the actual statement of the DNA.
Well, she possibly has a connection to an ancestor who is from Mexico, Peru, or I believe some Latin American country, which is what they actually tested it against, right? And so, you know, the article itself, if an expert gave you a fraction that ended up being mistaken, you issue the correction, that's the right thing to do. But again, there's also the issue of the fact that, you know, Elizabeth Warren, Native American, front page headline and correction, oops, little tiny asterisk.
I think that correction was pretty well. I think.
Well, but again, that's not even
Okay.
your job as the journalist yourself who's writing that.
Also, the headline
Alright, so wait, let's-
Elizabeth Warren, Native American. Did you just say
Elizabeth
that?
Warren has a strong
That was how
Native.
you described the headline. Elizabeth Warren, Native American. Is that what it said?
Well, yeah, a lot of outlets were marketing that
It's
that
not.
way.
Oh, but can we?
All right, yeah. Wait.
Is
All
it
right,
possible
wait.
to make
Hang
sure?
on. Wait. Hang on, Lauren.
I think
David in on
what's-
this and try to broaden this conversation
Yes.
beyond this one example. Yeah.
What's more interesting about this example is that just in this 5-minute sort of back and forth, we went from an initial criticism, which was that the story was fake because of the conclusion that was reported, to you having a problem with whether the headline was selected by the article's writer.
No, that's not the
Hold on,
problem.
let me
Wait,
finish.
Lauren,
If I-
wait.
I would just like to clarify.
Hang on.
That's not the problem that I have.
I'm sure
Let him
you'll be allowed
finish.
to
Hang on.
Later, whether the correction was prominent enough relative to the initial headline. We've gotten very, very far from even a conversation about whether this is a story that could qualify as fake news. We're now talking about the prominence of corrections relative to headlines.
Well, I think it's
which
part of
has
Hang on.
nothing to
Wait,
do
Lauren,
with
I'm going to let you respond. Hang on. Let's let David finish. David, go ahead and finish.
That's the gist of my point.
Okay. So, Lauren, hang on. I want to give you a chance to respond. But what I want to ask is, when everyone else was talking about, it seems to me one of the problems of many is nuance, right? We have trouble talking about nuance and getting to nuance when we have everything as 24/7, Twitter-driven, reaction-driven, reframe, repackage. So it seems to me some of what we're talking about nuance, what we're also talking about is in the definitions of fake news that we're given, intent mattered. And here we actually have said reporter saying the intent was to get it right, we misreported the range because of an expert, therefore corrected it so that now it's accurate. However you want to spin it, why is that fake?
Well, I think it's, clear to see that the original reporting was misleading. Like, all right, you corrected that.
Not intentionally.
Right. But I think the thing with fake news is that it goes beyond like one specific thing, right? This whole Elizabeth Warren story goes beyond what your article what you wrote about in your article for your entire, let's say, the Boston Globe, right? And so if we're looking at people who are pushing the narrative, like even the way in which you reported that, and again, that headline, which necessarily isn't you are pushing a narrative that, like, yeah, she's being vindicated. When you actually look at her statements where you're saying, like, yeah, my parents had to elope because my mother was part Native American, that goes in sharp contrast with, like, yes, her claims are vindicated by this DNA test. And again, that's not to say that your specific article was.
All right, hang on. I'm gonna put
I would absolutely say that the intent behind pushing this specific narrative, because you could have easily just said minuscule and suspected.
Hang on. I'm going to put a break on this because, first of all, that's a misrepresentation of Annie's story. And, by the way, she did put all of the nuance in there in terms of how Native tribes responded and what she had said and what was. But hang on. I'm going to move the conversation along.
What moderator actually shuts down a panelist when she's in the middle of making a point? I can understand a moderator bringing a panel back on topic after someone on the panel makes a point that is kind of off topic, but to shut someone down while they're in the middle of making a point, how are we supposed to argue with each other? Heck, how are we even supposed to make good-natured fun of each other unless we're willing to listen to someone else who has a different opinion from us? Even when we think that that opinion is complete garbage, how are we supposed to do that? And the fact that people were trying to defend the story that Elizabeth Warren is 1,024th something from South America as not fake news, points for effort, but I'm still not buying it. And example number 2. Saturday afternoon, I went to the debate between Turning Point USA's Charlie Kirk and Young Turk's Hassan Piker. I was really looking forward to their debate, and that was the only event that I left early because it turned, from where I was sitting, into a shouting match where both Kirk and Piker were trying to drown out the other. Now, I completely understand becoming passionate. You're supposed to be passionate. I can even understand getting hot under the collar, or whatever metaphor you want to use in that circumstance. But shouting each other down in an environment that is supposed to facilitate debate, that never quite clicked for me, especially when I was witnessing it firsthand. I'm not going to sit here and lay all the blame on either Piker or Kirk, because both of them were doing it, but that debate definitely had a carnival feel to it, almost like it was staged. I know it wasn't, but that was the feeling that I got when they each tried to drown out the other with their talking points. And it wasn't helped by the fact that that carnival feel was strengthened by the crowd feeding off of that. So those, very briefly, were my impressions on Politicon. It is great that there is an avenue where people from all sides of the political spectrum can get together under one roof to debate each other and to talk to each other. And I fully intend to go back next year and, well, hopefully every year that it's held. But at the same time, I couldn't help wondering, are people more interested in debating people, in actually being presented with different points of view? Or are we more interested in destroying the other side's arguments and destroying the other side? I saw evidence of both this weekend, and me personally, I hope that the passionate, good-natured debate wins out over the wanton destruction. This, of course, doesn't even touch what was the grand high watermark of the weekend, which was... But actually, to do it justice, what I'm going to do is give it its own video. It's not that this was completely revolutionary in that no one has said this before, but it is so seldom said, and so few people, I think, actually hear this point, that in my mind, it deserves its own video. So, in the very first sneak peek on the stone, in the next video, I am going to tell you what I thought was the high watermark of the weekend and why it is such a big deal. So until the next video, that about wraps it up for right now, gang. But before I go, I'd like to ask you, what do you think? What is more beneficial for our country and our society given the current climate that we're in today? Should we be passionately debating with people, meaning actually arguing with them, listening to what they have to say, and then countering what they say with understanding and logic? Or is this the time when it's just a good idea to throw red meat to the people who agree with us and destroy our opponents? I would be very interested to hear what you have to say down in the comments below. And as always, if you liked this video, whether you agree with me or not, then give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for notifications because I post new videos like this every Tuesday and you won't want to miss them. Thanks again everyone for watching, and I will see you all again here next week on Top of the Stone. Ciao.